This is Todd-o-phonic Todd, and I am here with Chris Frantz, longtime member of Talking Heads and Tom Tom Club, also the author of a new autobiography, Remain in Love, Talking Heads, Tom Tom Club Tina, published by St. Martin's Press. When you were in your early teens attending a school in Northern Virginia and already drumming, a friend of yours introduced you to black music. That was something of a game changer for you, right, Chris?
Well, I'd heard plenty of Motown and black popular music that got to the radio, got played on the radio, commercial radio, and but there was a lot of soul music that I wasn't familiar with, like even James Brown, for example, because this is before James Brown had crossed over to white audiences, and Sam and Dave and Otis Redding and Booker T and the MGs and James and Bobby Purify, all that great music. I had not heard it, so it was a kind of a revelation to me how great it was.
Mm-hmm. And when you're talking and Remain in Love about your time in Kentucky, I got very excited when you mentioned doing the dog at country clubs to the sounds of the Torquays. They were a local band with a number of releases on the Lexington-based Lemco label. And I'm not necessarily saying they were an influence on the Talking Heads, but it is interesting to note that the show bands of the 60s performed both soul and garage band covers, which is something the Talking Heads also did at their inception.
Yes, that's correct. When you get up on stage, you wanna play songs that get the audience moving, and garage band rock and soul is a very good way to do that.
Yeah, perfect for parties.
Yeah.
And you went on to attend Rhode Island School of Design, of course, also with Tina and David, who attended for a while and then hung out at the school when he was no longer taking classes. But I'm wondering, my impression is that going there sort of helped you guys think out of the box perhaps a little, not just in art, but also in music.
Yeah, I think maybe it did. Somebody was telling me the other day that they thought it was interesting. This is a person who had gone to Berklee College of Music. I think in our day it was called Berklee School of Music, and then they changed it to Berklee College of Music. But anyway, this person had attended there, and he said that he thought more interesting music came out of people who had gone to art school than people who had gone to music school, in terms of thinking outside the box and, that other cliche, pushing the envelope,
Right. And it's interesting to note that you and David performed in a band called the Artistics while at Rhode Island School of Design, and that's where Psycho Killer made its debut.
Yes. David came to, Tina Weymouth and I shared a painting studio. This is our senior year, our fourth year at RISD, and we were both studying painting, and we shared a painting studio, which was a real pleasure for me. And one day, David, we had been doing this band, the Artistics, for a little while. And speaking of garage band, that was like Lenny Kaye's Nuggets was sort of like our holy grail, and we did covers a number of those songs, as well as Paul Revere and the Raiders, and let's see who.
Yeah, I know you were doing a bunch of Kink songs and the Trogs.
Yes, exactly. So anyway, but we had imagined that maybe one day we could do our original material. So David came to our painting studio, and he had the beginnings of a song, he said, "I've got this song I'm writing, and it's inspired by Alice Cooper," which is funny when you think about it. But Alice Cooper was very big at that time, 1973. He was having these enormous hits, like number one hits and stuff. So David played us a little bit of the song, and we thought it was great. He had the first verse and part of the chorus. He hadn't really completely finessed the chorus yet, but what he came to us for was extra verses, and also he wanted a middle eight, a bridge that was in a foreign language, because he thought that he already had the title of the song "Psycho Killer," and he thought a psychotic person might abruptly switch languages for no apparent reason. And he said, "I asked this Japanese girl who was a student at RISD if she would help me with Japanese lyrics, but when she found out the title of the song was called Psycho Killer, she ran away." So I said, "Well, Tina is very fluent in French because her mother was French. Maybe Tina would like to write the bridge in French." And Tina immediately agreed and sat down and did it. And in this sort of Napoleonic, very, very antiquated, formal French, not the French slang that kids speak today. So anyway, she did that, and I added a couple of verses, and within a few hours, we had the first song that we ever wrote together, "Psycho Killer."
Mm-hmm. And after Rhode Island School of Design, you guys moved to New York, and Talking Heads are born, and you're justifiably proud from that. The band's very first show on, you never sounded like everybody else. Was that kind of a deliberate effort, or were you just doing what came naturally?
Well, sort of a combination of the two. I think naturally we sounded different, but we also, David had a very unique kind of trebly, almost high life guitar style, and Tina's bass parts were not really based on rock and roll, Chuck Berry and the blues. They were more classical in their approach. So it was interesting, but it was also by design that we didn't want to sound like other bands. A lot of bands were in those days would copy the Rolling Stones or copy the Who, or in Lower Manhattan copy the New York Dolls.
Right.
And we weren't interested in that, but to their credit, a lot of the other bands that played at CBGB's, like, say, Television and the Ramones and Blondie and Patti Smith and Mink DeVille, they didn't really sound like other bands either. Even though we were all playing the same venue, we were all very different in our musical sound.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating to me about that is, we were talking about garage bands and nuggets, and, the bands you mentioned, more or less, they all had the same influences and were listening to the same music with some variation. Yet it all, not only did the band sound different, but you also had distinctive looks. For instance, with the Talking Heads, you write that the image you wanted to convey via your clothing or look was of quote unquote seriously thoughtful people. That's not exactly the rock and roll blueprint, Chris.
I know, and that sounds so serious, doesn't it? After I saw Spinal Tap many years ago on a tour bus crossing the Midwest, I said to myself, I can never take this job seriously again. But we were very earnest and very serious about it back in those days. And and I think that was a good thing because, it was we were motivated, and I think we succeeded at being different.
Yes, for sure. And also, beyond playing the same club or clubs, the bands also lived in the neighborhood, and you Tina and David shared a loft, and that was, a dangerous time to be on the Bowery, but there was so much energy there at the same time.
There was. We had cool neighbors. Although I can't say we saw them every day or anything like that, but like 1 block away from us was Chris Stein and Debbie Harry. And in that same building was a fashion designer named Steven Sprouse that we knew from RISD. And Debbie, he did a lot of clothes for Debbie. Ornette Coleman was 2 blocks away. Dee Dee Ramone and Joey Ramone were spending most nights at Arturo Vega's place, which was like 4 blocks away. And, you would see everybody, Johnny Thunders, the guys from the Heart, Richard Hell. You would see them wandering around. And it was like this village full of very wild musicians.
Yeah. And before Talking Heads ever actually did a full-on U.S. tour, you did a tour of Europe opening for the Ramones. At that time, your only release was the debut single of Love Goes to Building on Fire, which was not a hit here. And the Ramones had a couple of albums out, but they were more notorious than popular, I would say, at that point. Yet, were you surprised? The venues you played were relatively large, and the reception was amazing. Were you surprised at that?
It very pleasantly surprised. But we had been told, I guess it was Seymour Stein told us, this tour is going to be very successful. The kids are going to go crazy, and he was right. That tour with the Ramones of Europe, people were really thirsty for the New York sound, bands from New York. That's all you had to say was the posters would say Ramones, Talking Heads, New York, rock New York, New York A's or whatever, rock New York, and the venues would fill up with people because. But we, having said that, we also got not a lot, but a fair amount of radio airplay there because European radio stations were a lot less strict about what the DJs could play. They didn't have the playlists that mandatory playlists like America had. So you would get listening to, say, Dutch radio. You would get a song by ABBA, and then you would hear something by Louis Armstrong, and then you would hear a Motown hit, and then you would hear, Buffalo Springfield, and then you would hear Talking Heads, and it was like...
sounds like American 60s radio, or WFMU. Now, one relatively early gig I saw Talking Heads perform at was at the Capitol Theater, and it also featured the Ramones, Eddie and the Hot Rods, and the Tough Darts, and it was billed as New Wave in New Jersey, Punk in Passaic. I'm wondering if you have any memories of that night.
I do remember it very well. Was that the night that the steamer blew up in Joey's face?
Yes, that's correct.
And he did the show anyway. Before and after the show, they took him immediately to the hospital. Poor guy.
Yeah.
What a trooper, though, huh?
Indeed. And speaking of Joey and the Ramones, a few labels were interested in Talking Heads based on what you were generating out of CBGBs, and of course you wound up signing with Seymour Stein and Sire, who signed quite a bit of the cool bands at that time. Do you think having an old school record guy like Seymour in your corner helped garner you more artistic freedom than you might have found elsewhere?
Well, I think Seymour was willing to give us whatever type of artistic freedom we wanted. He believed in our taste, and he believed that one day he knew that we were not for everyone, but he also knew that there was an audience waiting out there for what it was Talking Heads had to offer.
And on the day you signed the contract with Sire, I believe you and Tina also got engaged. Was that a coincidence?
Well, we had been talking about getting married, and that was the day where we looked at the contract and we said, well, now we have enough money to get married. We could quit our day jobs. And it wasn't like it was a lot of money or anything like that, but it seemed like a lot to us. And we felt like, oh, now we're going to have a more stable life. But yes, we got engaged and we were married in June of 1977.
And how do you think, you and Tina being a couple, how do you think that impacted the dynamic of the band?
Well, when asked that question, I always say that Tina and I didn't always agree on everything. Usually we did, but sometimes, Tina would have different ideas about things than I did. And that's still true. But I can see how maybe David felt like at times that it was 2 against 1, but we were never against David ever. We were always for David. That's why we chose him to be our lead singer and the front man of our band.
Yeah, and in writing about the recording of your wonderful first single, Love Goes to Building on Fire, you opine that, quoting here, David was not anybody's idea of a good singer, but he was our idea of a great vocalist. Could you expand on that a little bit?
Well, yes. We were very fortunate in 1976, 77, to be in a time when people gave a lot of, how shall I say it? People allowed vocalists to take liberties. You didn't have to be a singer like Paul McCartney or Smokey Robinson, If you're a woman, you didn't have to sing like Aretha Franklin. You didn't have to be that good, but what you had to be was original, and you had to. The audience had to think you were singing directly to them, that your message was going straight to them, and so there's sort of a purity involved, and I think that David had that in. Jonathan Richman had that too.
Sure.
In spades.
And speaking of Jonathan, how did the addition of Jerry Harrison impact the band? Jerry, of course, being a former member of the Modern Lovers. Yeah.
Well, Jerry fit in perfectly. I mean, he was kind of like the perfect choice. We had been wanting to add a person who played keyboards and possibly also guitar for some time, but we didn't find anyone that we thought we could really connect with. But when the first time we sat down with Jerry, we felt a strong musical connection. And Jerry was smart, and he was sophisticated, and he wasn't a rube,
Yeah.
So he fit in perfectly. He was very adaptable, musically adaptable, and that's also what makes him a good producer, I think.
Right. And speaking of producers, you worked with Brian Eno for the second album, More Songs About Buildings and Food. I think continue to work with him for a while after, and it went very well initially, but then kind of soured as things went on. Correct?
Yeah, that was because of look. We still love Brian, and we still think he's one of the world's great producers and artists. I mean, we like his own work also very much, but he became more and more demanding. I know that you too experienced the same problem. He wanted more and more and more, and until he wanted his name in big letters on the front of the album. He wasn't happy being just the producer. He wanted to be the producer and the artist, and it just became like an overload.
Yeah, that's unfortunate, but ultimately, the world of music and art really started to merge in various ways for you and Talking Heads, and I imagine that probably the whole band, but I know you certainly always felt a symmetry between the two worlds. Did that give you a thrill when you were sort of able to have maintain one foot in each?
In the art world and the music world?
Yeah.
Yeah. We always thought that art and music, I mean, music is art,
Right.
But visual art and music really go hand in hand. People who make paintings love music, and people who make music love paintings, It's like they're whatever the impulse is that makes you want to create a song or write a song is the same impulse that makes you want to make a painting or write a book. It's creative expression, being allowed to express yourself.
And Talking Heads and Tom Tom Club, I think you really broke some ground for people in ways, helping to establish the recording industry in the Bahamas with your use of Compass Point Studios, which rock bands, if you will, hadn't utilized before you did. And then also, I'm sure a lot of people probably discovered world music via the Talking Heads or rap music via the Tom Tom Club. Do you take a lot of pride in that?
Yeah, I do. But we were as influenced by rap music as rap music was influenced by us. So regarding world music, my parents down in the basement had all these Calypso records and Mambo records and Salsa records, things that they had loved when they were young. And I loved them too. We listened to these were on 78s, the old lacquer 78s. And I know David felt the same way, and so did Tina. They had listened to these types of records in their parents' collections also. And then as we grew older and went to art school, we were exposed to African music, Fela Kuti and Manu Dibango and stuff like that. And we really liked that because it was just so intense and so different from our own popular music. So this went back from way before we ever even heard of Brian Eno.
Right.
I know that some people think Brian was the person that introduced us to world music, but Not really, no.
Mm-hmm. And your relationship with David in the book seems to be somewhat complicated. Tina said he seemed incapable of returning friendship, just, generally speaking. But did you find that his attitude towards you and your bandmates got worse the more success you had, or was it pretty much a straight line?
No, when we first started the band, we were very good friends, and I wish we were still very good friends. But it's true. The more success we had, the more kind of distant David became, and I'm not sure what it was, but we continued to make really good music together.
Mm-hmm.
So I was just like, okay, these things happen, and I guess from what I know now, which I didn't really know then, he had been interested in being solo, being a solo artist for a very long time.
Yeah.
And now he is.
Right. And has playing music with your wife Tina for so many years, has that helped to keep it exciting for you?
Yeah. I mean, I love to play with Tina. She's the best. Somebody asked me, what other bass players would I like to play with? And I'm like, what do you mean? Why would I want to play with another bass? Mm-hmm. But if I had to answer, I would say either Bootsy Collins or Dee Dee Ramone.
And your autobiography, Remain in Love, published by St. Martin, this has been in the works for quite a while, right?
Well, I made the deal with them 2 years ago, and I spent a year and a half working on the book, and I mean, not every day,
right.
Like, for example, I would take around the Christmas holidays, I would not work on it for a month.
Sure.
But then I get back into it, and
that doesn't seem exceptionally long. I think I'd read somewhere, and maybe this is before you had the deal, but that you had been working on a autobiography, at least thinking about it for a while, I suppose.
Oh yeah, I was thinking about it for a very long time, like 10 years or something. But then at a certain point, I thought, well, it doesn't look like there's going to be any Talking Heads reunion, and I'm not getting any younger. And while I still have my memory, I'm of a certain age now, and I'm like an elder statesman now.
Right. Well, with some of the drug consumption mentioned in this book, I'm super impressed with your memory, Chris.
Well, I guess I'm very fortunate in that respect, because I couldn't help but notice that a lot of my friends, when I called them up to sort of fact check certain events and happenings and stuff, like, do you remember when we made that student film, and you asked David Byrne and I to do the music? Do you remember that? And the guy who made the film said, no, I don't remember. So, I mean, he really, truly didn't remember anything about it.
Right. Well, congratulations on your wonderful book, Remain in Love. And before we part ways today, Chris, I also want to ask you about your radio show on Connecticut's community station, WPKN, called The Talking Head. How long have you been doing that for?
Oh, I've been doing that about 10 years, I think. Mm-hmm. But I'm sorry to say I haven't been going into the studio lately because of the COVID-19.
Yeah, we're all doing our shows from remote locations ourselves nowadays.
Yeah, I just didn't want to get onto that microphone that everybody.
Sure.
But I love doing that radio show. Mm-hmm. Mine is only monthly. It's the last Friday of every month, and I love it. It's a great little station. Mm-hmm.
Can listeners find episodes online?
Yes. If you go to WPKN.org and you click on archives, and then you go to Chris Frantz, the Talking Head.
Right.
And you search that, and shows will come up.
Sure. And I would encourage listeners to do that, but only after this program is over. Now, thank you very much, Chris. Best of luck with the book and everything else you've got going on.
Thank you very much, Todd. All the best.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.